Hi, I'm Dominic Ponsford, Editor-in-Chief of Press Gazette, and I'm here with Shaun Lintern, who's the health correspondent of The Independent. Hi, Shaun.
Hi, Dominic. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm at home I'm in East Sussex, and you can see my lovingly arranged bookcase behind me, as is required. So we've followed your career of interest really over the years. I had a quick look, and we've followed you from your time on Your League paper, but started in 2003.
That's right, a long time ago.
Yeah, there's the great stuff you did on uh, the Express and Star, the Mid-Staff health scandal, and then more recent years on the Health Service Journal, where you won the Specialist Journalism Prize at the British Journalism Awards 2016.
Right.
And you've been at the Independent since 2018, is that right?
No, I only joined the Independent in October.
Oh, okay. So more recently than that.
Mm.
Um, anyway, so you obviously know your onions, and so it was great to get your insight on the current crisis, I guess. I mean, when did sort of COVID-19 or coronavirus, as we know, first come on your radar? When did you first realise it was going to be a thing?
Well, I think we sort of obviously were covering the issues going on in China and sort of around the sort of end of December, start of January, and it was very much then a sort of almost a foreign story, really, and not really that much on my radar. And it's slowly ramped up from there. And it was only really, I would say, probably about 3 to 4 weeks ago when things really began to dominate my coverage, to be honest. And I would say in the last month, I've pretty much written about nothing else really other than coronavirus. It's dominated every moment of my working life, I think, since then. And I suspect it will do for quite some time to come.
So, I mean, what's it been like, the intensity of it? I mean, you've worked on like a regional daily paper, so you're used to sort of cranking it out, I imagine. But I mean, what's it been like just in the last couple of weeks?
But it's interesting because obviously now, as a specialist journalist, I'm now working in an environment where every journalist is a health journalist now. Almost my entire newsroom are writing coronavirus stories, as are most newsrooms. And so the emphasis for me has been, how do I find those stories that are different and that are still important and being perhaps overlooked by the masses of health journalists that I'm now competing with. And to be fair, The Independent, we've done some interesting stuff, and we were the first to talk about a shortage of protective equipment, and we were the first to talk about the risks to the NHS's intensive care services. We did a front page on that back in the end of February, and it's been a really interesting experience to see how this narrative has changed in the public's mind and in the media's mind as well. And it's transforming society, this pandemic. It will be with us for a long time, and I think the effects of it will be with the NHS for an incredible amount of time. It's going to change the health system, I think, beyond recognition.
And what sort of tips do you have for your non-specialist colleagues who are suddenly covering some fairly complex medical issues? I mean, do you have any sort of pointers that you could share on how to cover health stories well?
Well, I would say most of them should have health correspondents in their newsrooms, and they should refer to their experience and expertise. I know the health pack in Fleet Street is very experienced. I'm their newest member, and I've been doing health journalism for 10 years in various guises. So I think that we should be trusting our expertise at the moment. But if you're a general reporter covering these issues, I think the most important thing is to not be blasé about this and not be blasé about the facts, to do your research. The power of Google is an incredible tool for journalists these days, and there are incredible resources out there, both via the academic journals and other sources of real scientific knowledge and evidence. And I think the worst thing is, if you're a general journalist, is just to bash out this copy and stick a scaremongering headline on it. And I have to say, actually, at this stage, I don't believe the media have been scaremongering that much. I think the reporting has been very reasonable, actually. I think we've been quite responsible in how we've reported some of these things and got the government's message and advice over to the public. And I think as long as we all just keep remembering that, of course, we've got a job to hold the government to account, and we've got a job to hold the NHS to account and to challenge and question where things might not be being done right, or where the truth may be slightly differing to the government's spin and sort of advice from the podiums. But we also do have a responsibility not to scare the public unduly. And there's a balance there that all of us as journalists have to strike. And if you're a journalist at the moment writing about coronavirus, you've got to have those things in mind and keep that focus really on the facts and the truth and what you can substantiate.
There's talk as always about sort of fake news. I've not seen any evidence of it myself. I see people sharing kind of dubious things amongst themselves on Facebook and WhatsApp and so on. But I've not seen a sort of evidence of kind of fake news in terms of, you know, journalists making things up or majorly getting things wrong. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair. As I said, I think the so far Fleet Street, as in its general sense, has got things fairly right on this so far, and I've not seen any stories out there which I've thought to myself, that's outrageous. In fact, most of it is actually being shared on social media, and I think a lot of journalists are now spending their time actually chasing things down and checking the rumours, and it's taking up an enormous amount of my time to check some of the rumours that, if they're true, would be incredible stories, but actually they're not true. And in the last few days, I've been chasing stories of doctors dying because they've infected with coronavirus. Today I've been chasing stories of doctors being mugged at knife point for their ID badges, but none of these seem to be true. And the Met Police have made it clear to me that they've had no reports of this actually happening. So I would urge everyone to not share this stuff. This stuff spreads on WhatsApp and Twitter now rather than via mainstream media, and I think that's it's actually quite heartening to see the mainstream media not picking this stuff up without checking it.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good point worth making that if journalists who are now categorised as key workers, if journalists weren't out there doing that, then this stuff would just be, its own sort of virus spreading, wouldn't it, of just of disinformation?
Absolutely. I mean, the story I mentioned this morning about doctors being mugged at knife point, if you look on social media, there are hundreds of posts about this now. It seems to have spread like a virus via WhatsApp, and it's actually scaring NHS doctors and nurses. They're actually making them feel less confident and worried about going to work. And actually, we need to not be doing that sort of thing. If this stuff is true, then someone like me will find out and will write about it. But I think people need to just be careful sharing things on social media. As ever, I would say this, but a bona fide, proper journalist is going to be the best person to trust for information at this point, I think.
So we spoke to the editor of Pulse, Jamie Kafash, last week. Interesting point from him was that he feels journalists almost have to slightly suspend their skepticism in the sense of trusting that public health authorities are acting in good faith, while we should scrutinise them. He feels that we shouldn't be too quick to call people out on things like U-turns when they, like everyone else, are sort of making this up on the hoof, and no one's ever dealt with this before. Is that sort of fair comment?
Well, I think Jamie makes a good point in one sense that a U-turn at this point, when the information is changing on a daily basis, maybe that's fair. But actually, as I don't think at a time of national crisis you don't suspend journalism. In fact, it becomes even more important. And if we've got a government that's telling the public don't worry when doctors and nurses are saying they should worry, it is our job to get into that debate, to get into that argument and provide some reality. And I just give as one example the furore there has been over the personal protective equipment for NHS staff at the moment. We wrote about that weeks ago and put it on our front page, and no journalist knows the impact of their stories, but we are seeing now the government is effectively bringing in the army to deliver these supplies. And I don't apologise for holding the health secretary and Boris Johnson to account if they're getting things wrong, even in a crisis, because that's at the point when a journalist becomes most valuable to society. And also the other point I'd make is that when this is all over and the dust settles, the journalism that was conducted during this crisis can be reviewed, it can be looked at by an inquiry, it can be read again by the future audiences. This stuff lives now forever in a digital environment, and we don't know what the effect of that will be in the longer term. And for example, we don't know whether future governments will make a different call around protective equipment for staff because we were writing so much about it now and we were holding the government's feet to the fire. So I understand why people say we all need to pull together in a crisis, and we really do, but I don't think we should suspend journalism. It's too important.
So what sort of stories have you written that have gone well in terms of attracted a big readership, and what's the sort of story in terms of readership? It seems that people are turning to news providers more than ever, really, to find out what's going on. They're all stuck at home, they're kind of desperate for information. So what's been the sort of story at the Independent in terms of traffic and so on?
Yeah, well, in terms of just general traffic and sort of reader appetite, I mean, we've seen huge traffic on any coronavirus related health story. I think the last time I checked our sort of analytics, it was showing the health page was 2,000% up in terms of traffic and page views, which is just incredible. And that's not down just to one health correspondent. Incidentally, the whole team are producing the news. But I think stories that I personally have written that have been particularly gone well. I did an interview with an Italian intensive care doctor who told me some quite shocking stuff around how they are coping or not coping, to be honest, with coronavirus. And she issued a pretty stark warning to the NHS to be ready. And that story went very well and is still being read now. I mean, that's the interesting thing in this digital landscape. Some of the stories I've written a week ago are still being actively read today. And then one other that I did really well. And again, I think this is about where someone like me can offer readers something a little bit different, something that differentiates from the massive just news around the numbers of cases. I did a story about the scientific modelling and what that's really telling us around the second wave and surge of the virus once these restrictions are lifted, and how we might actually be stuck in this situation for indefinitely, and how everyone's eyes are now on China, and where that is now crucial to see what comes next. And if China sees a resurgence in cases as it reduces the restrictions, that will tell us that the modelling is right, and that we could indeed be stuck in this sort of purgatory for quite a long time. And that story is still flying around and still getting well read today. So I think the traffic is huge for the daily updates, the numbers of cases, what Boris Johnson has said, that is getting lots of clicks. But the readers are also interested in the sort of more detail, more informational articles that get under the skin of this sort of pandemic story. And that's quite heartening for someone like me writing those articles.
I mean, you're someone who's covered health issues for a long time, and I mentioned the mid-staff's health authority scandal. I guess you're used to covering some fairly grim stuff. I mean, do you have any tips for in terms of how you kind of keep yourself chipper while covering a fairly grim story and being very deeply into it over a long time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually, Dominic. And I'm not sure I have always got it right, and I'd be the first to say that my stories over the years have affected me at times, and there's no doubt about that. And I think whenever you cover a story where there's a family who've been bereaved or suffered in a way that they really shouldn't have done, and you have to interview them, it takes a toll. It really does. And I think my advice would be to make sure that you ground yourself in your reality, your world, spending time with friends and family and getting outdoors and seeing the sky, and not necessarily brooding over what you can't really change. And I think all journalists, especially in the next few weeks, are going to probably come into contact with doctors, nurses, and families who've really something quite awful. And I think just remember that you are telling their story, you're giving them a voice. And one of the things that's always stuck with me right the way back to mid-staffs, when a lot of the families there brought their stories to me, they were saying it was because you gave us a voice, and that was really important and helpful. And I took some comfort from that as a journalist. So although I was writing horrible things that happened to them, they actually felt benefited by that, and I gave them a voice. And I think that's all we can do as journalists. That's what our craft is for. And you can take some heart in that and some comfort in that, and it can give you some stability, I think, which is something I draw a lot on in my role, because it is, unfortunately, can be quite a grim job sometimes, covering the health service. But and I think in the next few weeks, it's not going to be the happiest of patches, but we must all look after our own well-being.
Yeah, well, do that, Shaun. Listen, thanks very much for your time. I'm where you're very, very busy and need to get on with it. So keep up the good work, and I'll look forward to meeting you for a beer, not too distant future. Hopefully, when all this is behind us.
Yeah, definitely. I'll hold you to that, Dominic.
Thank you, Shaun.
Cheers.